My name's Courtney Dalton. My great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a skipper of the Clarence. I found that out about 3 or 4 years ago. In fact, when I was building this boat, I did some research on family history on Jenny, the website. I was fortunate enough to find a lady who had a fair bit of information and found out that my grandfather was in fact a skipper. Probably the most interesting part about that, or the most exciting for me, was first of all the fact that I'd had a connection with the ocean my whole life, my surfing and diving and fishing and sailing, and then the fact I was building a wooden boat, and then find out that my grandfather was the skipper. So I ended up going down to the Queenscliff Maritime Museum, and Les Dusting grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and took me down the back of the museum and said, well here you go, this is actually the binnacle from your great-great-grandfather's ship. And that was quite surreal, actually, looking at the binnacle that he steered the ship by. That was an artefact that I'd seen many times in the Maritime Museum, but actually never knew the connection with us. It was great to do the dive, and I'd actually been planning to get a permit, or at least dive it at some point. And it was great that Cass could give me an invite out there and take me on board and give us a chance to have a look at her.
How did it feel diving on something with that personal family connection?
It was interesting. My brother-in-law came out with me as well, and when we were sailing back after the dive, he said, did you feel that energy? And I said, oh, I did. So felt the energy. In fact, I went down at one stage and touched part of the hull, and it was amazing. It was a special feeling, and it really did ground me a lot. I mean, I've grown up here since I was 2 years old, and I've always had a very strong affiliation with Queenscliff, Port Phillip Bay, Bass Strait, and it really was a great thing to have that family connection, and it was nearly a sense of belonging, and that was a great thing. When I first found out about it, I really went to town to check and make sure that it was correct, because as I said, I've had a very strong affiliation with the ocean. It's my life, really, in many ways. And as I said, as building this boat and spending all the time in the research of the class and wooden boats in general, whether it be, you know, the sailing clippers or cooter boats or whatever it was, to find out that my grandfather was actually, it was like it was obviously in the blood, if you like. So that was pretty cool.
Did you get a sense of him when you were doing the research?
He was definitely a very responsible character, because I'd done, like I said, the research is difficult because you don't actually often get a picture of who the person is. But I know one thing: he was a sober man, which is obviously a good thing, especially for a skipper. And then it turns out that he ended up in Ballarat and was a fireman there and well respected. When he died, ironically, he died rowing a scull in Lake Wendouree, and died from a heart complaint or something at 67. So even though he'd left the ocean to go to Ballarat and be a fireman, a completely different life. You know, it's nearly, you couldn't get anything two things worlds apart. And maybe he'd had so much time on the water and just had enough and away from his family, and said, look, this is too hard, I need to get away completely. And the only way to do that is get right out of there and go inland. So that's what he did. And as I said, he died ironically rowing a scull in Lake Wendouree. And as I said, as far as his character goes, he had a public funeral, and so there was a massive respect for him. He was obviously well respected. What is a shame is that unfortunately my dad died when I was 21, and I didn't get a chance, like he didn't get a chance to know this history. I'm sure he didn't know this. I'm sure he would have told me if he did, but I don't think he knew. So there was a bit of sadness going, you know, geez, it would have been good for him to understand that and know that background, because in fact my love of wooden boats did come from my dad, because he was into wooden boats. He had a couple of wooden boats, and one in particular that we had for many years, and that was probably what's kicked me on. So in effect, it was in him as well.
You mentioned your connection with the wooden boats, and then that you've sort of built this. Can you explain a bit about the boat itself?
The hull was built by Brett Armand, who's a boat builder from Queenscliff. His family have been fishermen for many generations. He's leaked to Queenscliff in the Cooter boat era. So I asked Brett to build the hull for me and then guide me through the process, which he did fantastically. Great mentor. And yeah, look, I just basically hooked into it and off we went. So it was a big project, and at 50% I was like, what have I taken on here? And I didn't actually think I'd finish it, and often I'd ring him and say, I'm not going to finish this thing, you know, and he'd say, no, just keep going, get it finished, and I'd just push on to the next stage. So it was a good challenge, and it's a great boat, and I love going out in her, and yeah, it's good.
We got some lovely shots the other day of you arriving just on the and hooking up to trim, which is quite nice. Did you kind of feel, in a way, justified pushing on with this project and then finding out about your connection with Clarence?
Well, it's interesting, whether it's right or wrong, I haven't really thought about it too far yet, but my brother-in-law said to me, you know, you probably wouldn't have got to dive that boat if you didn't, you wouldn't get to dive you wouldn't have got to dive the Clarence if you hadn't have built this boat, because that sort of started that research process. And it's interesting where the energy takes you. One of the things that was interesting is after diving the wreck the other day, and I was driving off and I was like, you know, that wreck happened before the Boer War, before Ned Kelly was hanged, before obviously Vietnam War, World War I, World War II, Federation of Australia, the gold rush. It's before the gold rush, and you think, you go to Sovereign Hill and you see all that stuff and it's so ancient, and here this guy was sailing this old wooden boat around between Geelong and Hobart in just crazy conditions, and yeah, it's just amazing. He lived in Hobart, and he traded from Hobart to Geelong, Hobart, Melbourne, and I think he went to up the south coast as well. I think up past Eden Way up there as well. So they did a few trips into that area. So yeah.
So really, you could genuinely say an important figure in the establishment of you know, the growth and development of Melbourne, really.
Oh, without doubt. I mean, without those trading ketches, I mean, they were the, you know, they were the ships of the day, and yeah, no doubt.